If Quake, any version of Quake, was the biggest game in the world right now, then Cooler, the Russian maestro of Quake, would be the biggest star in all of esports, in my opinion, in the entire world of esports of competitive gaming. Now, obviously, Quake was the biggest game once upon a time, but that was in the late 90s. Ever since about 2001, it hasn't been the premier esports title, the biggest esports title, the most watched esports title, because Counter-Strike took over, and basically Quake never regained its footing. Not that it fell off as much, but it was big, and then other games overtook it, and then in time it gradually faded and receded into a background where it was a very niche game. Now, Cooler himself only really rose up as an elite level talent in around 2003, by which time Quake was long gone in terms of being the number one game, or the biggest game, or the premier game, or the most watched game. So, talking about right now, people might think that's why I clarify that. Now, I'm not talking about if Quake had been the best in 2005 when Cooler was very, very good, or if in 2008 or 2009 if the game was the biggest then. I'm talking about if Quake right now was the number one game. Somehow we have all the same fans, all the same other games exist, but somehow Quake, a version of Quake, such as Quake Champions or Quake Live, was the biggest game in the world. I think right now, Cooler would be the biggest star in all of esports, the most transcendent one. So that means he would be, as the title says, bigger than Faker, because I think of Faker, when I try to figure out who's the biggest star right now, who has all the qualities, massive, massive appeal, but also worldwide interest from fans, mega exposure, etc., accomplished a lot. But I don't just mean Faker. I mean, I largely picked the Faker example, kind of as an ode to, an homage to that classic John Lennon quote that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, because at the moment Faker is kind of esports Jesus, but there's other people who currently and in the past have played that role. Flash from Brood War over to StarCraft 2. Kenny S has been one of the few Counter-Strike players who's remained a world-class superstar player and on one of the best teams for many, many years, but we're talking about for 4 or 5 years without really dropping off. He's still on a team that can win big tournaments now, still an incredibly popular player. Dendi in Dota, yes, his teams haven't done anything in a long while. He's still a very, very big fan favorite though. Bjergsen would be another name you'd have to reference. It sounds weird to name 2 League of Legends players, but obviously he's one of the biggest in the West, one of the most popular in the West, plays for one of the most popular teams. Therefore, you'd have to say in terms of popularity, he's very high up there. Obviously, it doesn't really make as much sense to put him in a category with Faker, because Faker has all that Bjergsen has, and arguably more. I also think the Dendi one's a bit tougher, because in Dota, it's really tough to actually pick who the biggest star would be and who can contrast against the other games. Because I have to say, compared to all those other games, I feel like there's the least crossover between Dota, as in fans of CS watching Dota, fans of League watching Dota, as there is between some of the other games. I don't think their stars are as transcendent of their games, just in terms of amount of exposure and fans who care. And also, I think what makes it unfair is, if you're a Westerner reading Western websites and Reddit, etc., you're going to get a Western perspective on it. And so when you consider that, like, 3/4 of the viewership of Dota 2 is Chinese people, you have to kind of figure out, well, who do the Chinese people like? So I don't think you can just pick Dendi or RTZ or whoever it might be, So generally, I'd just ignore Dota. Let's get back to this point then. So let's consider, first of all, with such a bold statement that Cooler would be the biggest star in the whole world, what makes you a big star in esports? Well, let's get a few categories. So success. Let's just start right there, because if you're a winner and you're someone who's being very successful, not necessarily just in terms of winning the trophy, but getting deep in tournaments very often, being in big finals, sometimes winning trophies, sometimes beating your big rivals. Success will immediately give you a great boost and a chance to be very, very big and very famous, because you're going to get a lot of exposure because you're going so deep in tournaments, you're playing many games, and you're therefore reaching world championships and big finals. So people are going to get a chance to know who you are and follow you as a player. And people really love to watch winners. If you're someone who wins a lot, there will always be some people who will gravitate towards that and will cheer and support you and just respect you, venerate you, idolize you. So many reasons as to why people enjoy watching winners and what we love about it. So obviously, then you have style, your style of play. People generally want to watch really exciting styles of play. Sure, there are rare examples like GSP in MMA. And I mean, there's been other players in history who the actual style wasn't that exciting and as great as like knockout style files or very, very decisive style, but they can sometimes still be very popular. But I'll go ahead and tell you, if like GSP had all the other qualities, be it a champion, defended his belt many times, had great in interviews, very good personality, etc. If he'd also had the most exciting style and be like Conor McGregor guy, knocking people out, it would have been even bigger, I can guarantee you. So let's consider again, that's another thing, strengths. what are your strengths? If you can have all the other above qualities, but you can also be the best in the world at something within your skill set, that will fascinate people because they'll think, how can he be the best in that area, or be so visible that you're slightly better than others? That has its own kind of compelling component. And I'd say the final category is personality. Because, I mean, within this umbrella, category, we can add in charisma, just natural ability to attract or repel people, branding, how you market yourself, with a persona that you create for yourself. These elements will really draw people to you, not necessarily just to like you, sometimes to hate you, but they'll still want to watch you fight, like Floyd Mayweather or Conor McGregor or whoever. Or you might be the babyface, you might be the GSP, they might be the guy where they just love to watch you fight, they think you're the best. Or some of these examples we've given before, Flash, Faker, Kenny S. People just really want to see you play. I wouldn't say those people necessarily have the charisma, but people love to watch them as the hero, right? So let's go through these categories and you'll see how actually Cooler would be number one in every category, as ridiculous as it sounds. Now, maybe not entirely in the first one, because in terms of success, yeah, he might not be the best Quake player in the world right now if he played, or at a key point when you make Quake the biggest game. But over his history, he has had among the most success in any versions of Quake. One of the best players of all time. So as a result, he would get a lot of exposure, he would get a lot of camera time if Quake was a huge game. He's managed to get to and maintain an elite level in Quake games from basically 2003 to 2017, with very few years that were at all off years. And his idea of an off year, by the way, is maybe be like the fourth best player in the world. So this guy's done it across four versions of Quake, actually. Quake 3, I mean technically 3 because Quake Live's kind of like Quake 3, but it's a different enough game. Quake 3, Quake 4, Quake Live, and now Quake Champions. Obviously, winning helps your popularity. So he's someone who would be winning matches and would be getting deep in tournaments and perhaps would win tournaments. So success, immediately he's got that. He would be very, very successful. Even though, yes, people like Faker, people like Flash at their prime are ahead of him in that respect. Then you go to his style of play. This is a guy where his style was a very decisive. So he had a very controlling style, a game plan approach, but his controlling style led to him then looking for advantages, which he would press and take advantage and therefore create exciting moments and push his lead and really dominate opponents, but in an exciting fashion. So he's not someone who would hesitate. He's someone where, because he is so decisive, it makes his execution more thrilling, more impressive, because he just follows through on it. He doesn't stop and then pause and think, I've done a mistake there, and pull back. He doesn't ever play scared or super defensive, barring very extreme examples like those ones in the 2011 IEMs where he was battling Avec, where that was actually one of the few approaches you could take to neutralize Avec. Generally, a very exciting player who's going to have a game plan, he's going to think up a plan, he's going to think that his plan works, that he's the smartest player in this match, and he's going to take advantage of it. People love to see decisive play. That is a very, very compelling thing to follow, and really fascinating when people can pull it off and make it work. Another factor is Cooler was and is a comeback specialist. He's one of the best of all time at getting back into a match that's gone to the opponent briefly, because he doesn't just wait and then sit back and think, right, I've really got to think about how this and play defensive for a little bit. Well, he's one of those guys who would look for an opening instantly and say, this will be decisive. It might be ballsy, it might be dangerous, but I'll take it now. And that'd get him straight back into matches. So you never felt like he was out of a match. That's very exciting to watch. Then, as a result of this fact, this decisive component, this fact that he's good at comebacks, he doesn't let himself just get choked out. If he's out and he's just a couple of frags down, he doesn't let the opponent just run the map on him and play scared and hope he gets a chance here and try and hit a lucky shot there. He doesn't let himself get choked out, and that is a really key quality, because I've noticed fans really gravitate towards people who don't just let themselves get beaten in that way in an unsatisfying manner. They give it their all, and they're willing to get beaten much bigger as long as they have a chance to get back in the game, and sometimes pull these miracle wins out the bag. You think of, in League of Legends, there was the Moscow 5 Gambit Gaming thing. It's one of the things they were most famous for, and why they had epic comebacks. You think of Virtus Pro in CSGO. They don't go down without a fight, right? They've had times when they were bad and they've lost, but they don't lose because they're scared or because they didn't make a big play. They go for those plays, and therefore they have some of the most epic matches in the history of esports. In doing all these things, Cooler can get himself out of trouble. So you always feel like if you're watching him and he's your hero, it's still a chance for him to win. He could still do this because he does it with his brain, and he does it with his balls as well. He's willing to take big risks, but he's also so smart he can find a way out of it. And if you hate him, if you're against him, it's going to be compelling to watch him play, because you never feel quite safe when your guy's in control and he's just been pushed out of map control. You know he can get back in at any moment. And that's a key quality. Cooler is so smart as a player. That's within his style. So he always comes up with the genius plays and the traps and the little things he's set up where you're like, oh, fucking hell, where did that come from? As such, he's always working on little tweaks to his game plan on how he's going to beat other top pros and figure them out, which is why he's had this massive success over a decade and a half, because he could always keep adapting to those top opponents. A really key quality to being exciting and loved as a fan is he doesn't crack under pressure. A very, very clutch player. Yeah, he could tilt a little bit, but within reason. It's very rare he gave up whole maps. He would only generally do it when it was out of control. If he tilts for one kill, he'll get it back under control and then he'll find his way back into the game. It's why he's a comeback specialist. So the ability to always perform against the best and in the huge matches, I mean, you think of all those great moments where it's a really tense match, it's been a big final, he gets that key kill, he's like, "Dah!" and just does that, which is like yes in Russian. These are iconic moments that you see throughout his career. So that is something that fans would really latch onto, this ability to always perform in that way. Then you look at his strengths. This is a guy who developed a very wide skill set. He came into the Quake as not one of the strongest aimers. He had a good LG, not really very good rail, decent rockets, and he mainly used his brain early on and his ballsy style of play that he perfected to dominate people. But later on, as we got these aim monsters coming and become very good players, he had to develop his own aim to have a fantastic rail and have a very good plasma gun, to the extent that now, where he is as a pro now, one of his core strengths, you would have to say, is not only is he very good in every area of skill set, he has nothing he does poorly. He doesn't have any clear weakness. His weakness over the last few years is sometimes someone else is so godlike, they're a bit better than him. That's about it. Then you go to the area I think would make the most difference. He's got it all in all the other areas, but this one would emphasize everything beyond the scope of any of those players I've listed before and blow them out of the water, which is personality. Because you want to talk about personality, Kula is one of the best personalities in the history of esports. This is a guy who is very confident, with some arrogance mixed in, but it's also well-founded. He is this kind of brilliant player who's managed to constantly revolutionize, innovate the game, adapt, get his skills to a key level, compete, never crack under pressure, and that leads into shit-talking, which, yeah, is a byproduct of confidence. But he also does it as psychological warfare. He sets up his opponents where he wants them to think about some key area he thinks they're lucky in, or he's going to beat them in some certain way, or they were fortunate to get by in another aspect. That starts the battle before they've even gotten in the server. He's a guy where he has his own standard of skill and strengths that he judges himself on, and therefore he judges others on. So sometimes he can say a player's shit, who's actually like the 5th best player in the world, because he doesn't think they're as good. You think of some of his arguments he's had in the past to calling Cypher and Avec lucky, or saying that Toxic can just aim and has no brain, you know. This is a classic aspect that you'll love to hear that shit talking. It's so rare that like the 2nd best player in the world will shit talk the 5th best player who doesn't necessarily have a personal disagreement with him. That makes the matches even more hyped up for people, right? And he's so good at the shit talking, which makes it very compelling because he's such a charismatic guy. He has that Chael Sonnen and Conor McGregor aspect, except unlike those guys, he doesn't have to script it. He can just come up with it impromptu and it's straight fire so much of the time. There's so many classic lines of him just being bit shit talking, sometimes a bit disrespectful, daring someone else a little bit. That would be incredibly popular, especially in this era of so many buttoned up professionals, and especially in this era when there's so many fans that are casuals, because this is someone where they love to follow people with personality, and people that give good interviews are sometimes above skill, etc. So he has all that anyway, and he has the charisma that so few champions and those names that I mentioned before actually have. Then you got to add in, because he comes from the CIS region, at the moment CIS is massive in esports, so he'd have the following of the CIS players and Westerners who'd love him. Then you got to add in, he'd get the dual crowd of being the hero for some, because he gets out of trouble, his style of plays, he always makes the daring play, he can be a champion, he's got great history, he is like a statesman of the game, but then he'd be the villain for some people, where he's talking shit on their favourite player, or he's beating their favourite player, or he has a rival with their favourite player. This will be really compelling as well. I think people actually might take for granted, as I list off Kula's skills, in terms of the categories of what can make you a beloved, massive star in esports, that it's actually very rare to have all of these combined in one person. To have someone who has championship level skills, but also has the charisma to make people care about them and want to watch them play, as well as just for being very good at the game. To have like an element of shit talking that keeps it interesting, keeps it exciting. To have the skill set and the style that make for exciting matches. So actually the quality of the product's very good, and people have to watch you because you're so exciting and you attract them in that respect. And then to be decisive under pressure as well. And as such, to also have some of the most iconic, memorable moments in games of all time. Because you look at the other kind of names, some of those big names I listed before. So let's use Faker from League of Legends, most successful player of all time. Bjergsen, perhaps one of the most successful Western players. Flash from Brood War and StarCraft 2. And let's use Kenny S. Now, I picked Kenny S because in general, CS changes year for year. And he's one of the few players who's remained a huge star and a very popular player, but a very good player for so long. So you look like, okay, let's look success, raw success. Who gets through the door? Right, yes, Faker has it. He's won 3 world championships, many LCK titles. Bjergsen has it, but only domestically. He's won a lot of NALCS titles, but he's never really done it on a worlds level, so success, he can't really, put it this way, if he'd won as many worlds as Faker had, then he would be the super ultra mega world star of all time, because he speaks English as well, appeals to all fan bases, comes from the origin, the west of League of Legends, and all the Koreans and stuff would be very excited by him, for sure he'd be a big star, but he doesn't have the same level of success to match up to a Faker. Flash used to have it in Brood War in 2010. In StarCraft 2, he never got that success level, so he could never become even necessarily the number 1 StarCraft 2 player. He might have been in terms of raw fans in Korea, but he couldn't supersede all the Western players. He couldn't supersede everyone overall. He definitely couldn't have the raw success that forced him into every big final, because that just didn't happen for him. Kenny S sometimes has it because he's had a lot of success over his careers. His teams have come back to being very good or winning titles. But even so, he doesn't really have it on the level of a Faker. So Faker certainly can contrast his career success-wise against Coolers, but you look at the other areas and Faker doesn't necessarily have it because, okay, let's now go to style of play. Is the style of play going to make you very popular? Okay, Faker does have that because he has this crazy hard carry style of play, but also incredibly good in terms of as a teammate, how he draws pressure, how he becomes like a pressure vacuum, how he then applies this pressure elsewhere on the map. But you know what? Because he plays, first of all, a team game, he's reliant on his teammates. Secondly, he plays a game where the meta is constantly changed by patches. So there have been times, Season 4 Spring you think of, let's say, I'd say late Season 5. It didn't really feel like mid often could carry you when you got to Worlds that year as much. The game doesn't always allow you to have the style that Faker otherwise would probably choose to play, whereas Cooler can play his style any day in any version of Quake pretty much. Bjergsen doesn't really have it. Like, you look at his career, it hasn't really been like a fantastic, one-on-one duelist or like making crazy plays all over the map. He's just been consistently excellent, and he in no sense has ever been the best player in the world, whereas Cooler has, Faker has, etc. Flash had it, certainly, in terms of his style was amazing to watch, but also he could be so dominant that actually sometimes it made the games boring. It made it feel like the other guy wasn't doing anything, whereas actually the other guy was. He was just trapped by Flash being so far ahead of him in terms of what he could do macro-wise or positioning-wise, and how far ahead he was in terms of the mental game. And Kenny S certainly has it in terms of style. He didn't quite match up in terms of success, but in terms of style of play, one of the most electrifying styles of play you'll ever see. That crazy, mad aggressive, flick shooting style where you can get multiple kills over and over again, but also plays a team game. So he needs good teammates if he's want to be in a position to play as many games and as many high-profile games as someone like a Cooler or a Faker, etc. In terms of strengths, being the best at some area, I'd say all of them to some degree have strengths. Bjergsen obviously isn't the best in the world at any one thing, but all of them generally within their own domain match up. The problem is, even if some of them have so far have kept abreast and like have just been close on some of the areas, like kept the pace rather, in terms of personality, they all just fall apart because Faker's Korean, doesn't have amazing English, has good English, but doesn't have amazing English, certainly doesn't have understand of Western culture and can't be brazen in the same way because he's Korean. Bjergsen doesn't really have a mega personality. He has an all right personality, but he's not like a super charismatic guy who you watch streaming just for his personality, He doesn't really have that quality. Flash definitely doesn't. Again, kind of like Faker, Korean, just spends 15 hours a day playing StarCraft. Yeah, guess what? He doesn't have some amazing trash talk or great lines to say generally. Kenny S, I mean, to some degree has some personality, but actually of Western players in esports, even though he's someone who can speak English, certainly, first of all, he didn't for many years when he was one of the best in early CSGO. And then secondly, he doesn't really necessarily have the most interesting personality or great banter. Whereas Cooler has all of that. He has amazing shit talking, banter, ridiculously charismatic, someone who's a very fascinating individual, has a very unique way of thinking about things, very philosophical at times, but they can also be kind of petty, but in a cool way because shit talking. So in that sense, Faker and other people might have had advantages or been as good as him in some of those other categories. No one can stand up in terms of personality though. So you roll it all together, I think Cooler would be the number one star in all of esports. Now, problem is, Quake isn't that big a game. The opportunities aren't there right now for it to be a big game, and therefore he's not going to be on huge esports stages and in the forefront of everything and doing big interviews and having people from other games who like Faker, like some of these guys from CS, think, oh, I've got to watch that guy. Like people who didn't care about basketball but got interested in Michael Jordan, started watching it, and we start watching his matches to see how he's doing. He can't really have that quality. So it's unlikely it's ever going to happen. This is more just a hypothetical, but I think if you look at all the different categories, Cooler would be the biggest thing in esports.
Hey, this is Cap, and you're watching Thorin, the only man besides Richard Lewis who somehow found a way to get both League of Legends and Dota Redditors to hate him.